A lonely Texas highway. A desperate voice on a 911 call. And then, nothing. On August 9th, 2013, Brandon Lawson vanished into the dark, leaving behind one of the most chilling recordings in modern mystery history. His words were slurred, panicked, and broken by static, but one thing was clear. He was afraid. He said he was being chased. Then he disappeared. No body, no phone, no trace. Only theories, whispers, and questions that refused to fade. Was it an accident? A crime? Or something else entirely? Something that defies reason on that empty Texas road? Tonight, we journey beyond the facts, into the shadows of uncertainty, as we explore the vanishing of Brandon Lawson, a mystery that still echoes across the plains. It began like any other quiet evening in West Texas. The sun had slipped beneath the horizon, leaving behind a pale orange glow that slowly gave way to darkness. The roads outside San Angelo stretched for miles, flat, empty, and silent except for the occasional truck rumbling through the night. Nothing about this evening suggested that it would end in mystery, tragedy, and a decade of unanswered questions. Brandon Lawson was 26 years old. He worked in the oil fields, a demanding job that required long hours and frequent travel. Friends described him as hardworking, funny, and loyal, a man who loved his children and often talked about building a better life for them. He shared a small home with his longtime girlfriend, Ladessa Lofton, and together they were raising 4 young kids in San Angelo, a city where everyone seemed to know someone who worked the rigs. Like many families living paycheck to paycheck, stress came and went. There were arguments about money, long work shifts, and the pressure of balancing bills with the needs of a growing family. Still, those close to Brandon say he always tried to make things right when tension appeared. He wasn't perfect, but he was present. That Thursday night, August 8th of 2013, the couple's evening turned sour. It's unclear what started the disagreement. Some say it was over work, others say it was about recent choices Brandon had made, but the voices grew louder, the frustration heavier. Eventually, Brandon decided to leave the house and clear his head. He grabbed his keys, his phone, and left in his silver pickup truck. It was close to midnight. Outside, the temperature hovered in the mid-70s Fahrenheit. The highway leading north out of San Angelo is long and empty, bordered by dry brush and rolling fields. At that hour, the darkness can feel absolute. No streetlights for miles, no towns for comfort. Drivers often say that on those roads, it feels like the world falls away behind the beams of your headlights. Before pulling out, Brandon made a few quick calls. He tried to reach his father, perhaps to talk or to calm down after the argument, but couldn't get through. Moments later, he spoke briefly with his brother Kyle. He told Kyle he was heading to his father's house, a short drive of about 45 minutes. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. What no one knew was that somewhere along that route, Brandon's night, and his life, would take a strange and irreversible turn. Brandon's phone records show that he made several more calls after leaving home. Some connected, some didn't. In each, his tone seemed different. Agitated, unsure, but never fully panicked. To family members, it sounded like he was frustrated, maybe low on fuel, maybe lost. He had driven this road countless times, but in rural Texas, one missed turn could mean miles of empty land before another landmark appears. By the time the clock neared 12:30 a.m., Brandon's truck was somewhere near Bronte, a small community surrounded by farmland and quiet pastures. It's the kind of place where the night air carries only the buzz of insects and the wind through the mesquite trees. A place where a voice calling for help could vanish before anyone hears it. Later that night, Brandon would place a call that still echoes across the internet, a 911 call filled with confusion and fear. But before that moment, he was just another young father on a Texas highway, trying to find his way home after an argument, perhaps tired, perhaps angry, perhaps unaware that fate was closing in. Those who loved him remember his laugh, his big plans, and how much he adored his kids. His disappearance would leave an absence that still weighs on the Lawson family today, a silence that no search, no headline, and no discovery has ever fully explained. And so, it began not with a crime or a chase, but with a simple decision, a man stepping out into the night to cool down after an argument. One drive, one road, one phone, and eventually, one call that would puzzle investigators for years to come. Arguments in relationships happen, but sometimes the smallest spark can light a fire that burns out of control. For Brandon and Ledessa, the evening of August 8th, 2013, started like any other. Kids at home, Brandon back from work, and the usual rush of late-night chores. But beneath the surface, something was boiling. Brandon had been working long shifts in the oil fields. It was exhausting, dangerous work that left him drained both physically and emotionally. He had recently failed to return home after a previous argument, choosing instead to cool off elsewhere, which had frustrated Ledessa. So when tensions rose again that Thursday night, emotions flared faster than either expected. A count from the family suggests Brandon may have relapsed on drugs that evening, possibly methamphetamine. It wasn't something new, but it was something he'd been fighting to overcome. If true, it could explain some of the confusion, paranoia, and odd behavior that would soon follow. Still, that's just one theory. What's certain is that by around 11:30 p.m., words turned sharp, and Brandon decided to leave. He stormed out of the house, keys in hand, saying he needed space. Ledessa didn't try to stop him. After all, sometimes letting someone cool off is better than forcing another fight. Brandon walked to his silver Ford F-150 pickup truck, climbed inside, and drove away into the dark Texas night. At first, nothing seemed strange. Brandon was heading north, most likely toward his father's house near Crowley, a familiar drive of about 45 minutes to an hour. But in rural West Texas, the line between just a drive and the middle of nowhere appears quickly. Once outside San Angelo, the road stretches endlessly through flat, empty plains. No towns, no gas stations, no light, only the hum of tires on asphalt and the glow of headlights cutting through the dark. As the miles passed, Brandon made several phone calls. He called his father to say he was on his way, but got no answer. He also called his brother, Kyle Lawson. The two were close. Kyle later said Brandon didn't sound himself. His words were fast, scattered, and filled with nervous energy. Still, Kyle assumed it was just stress from the fight. Shortly after midnight, Brandon's tone changed again. He called Kyle once more, this time sounding anxious. He said something that caught Kyle off guard. 3 expletives are chasing me out of town. The line went silent for a moment. Kyle asked, what do you mean? But Brandon didn't clarify. The signal crackled, the call dropped, and Kyle was left unsure if his brother was serious or just overreacting. At 12:30 a.m., Brandon's truck ran out of gas on Highway 277, about 4.5 miles south of Bronte, Texas. It's a lonely stretch of road, no nearby houses, no stores, no real shoulder to pull off on. He coasted to the side of the highway, where his truck came to a stop in the dark. From that moment on, the story becomes a puzzle of phone calls, confusion, and fear. Brandon called Ledessa to tell her he had run out of fuel. She, still upset from the argument, offered to leave a gas can on the porch so someone could pick it up. She didn't feel safe driving out herself with the kids asleep. Minutes later, Kyle and his girlfriend, Audrey, decided to go help. They grabbed the gas can from Ledessa's porch and headed toward Brandon's last known location. While they were en route, Brandon placed several more calls. One of them would become the center of one of the strangest missing person cases in recent history, a 911 call that no one can fully explain. But before we get there, what's crucial to understand is the timeline. Between 12:30 and 1 a.m., Brandon's phone was active, making calls to 911, to Kyle, and to Audrey. He was talking to someone, somewhere, and he was clearly in distress. When Kyle and Audrey reached the stretch of Highway 277, they spotted Brandon's truck on the side of the road, partially blocking a lane. The driver's door was unlocked, the keys were missing, and the gas tank was empty. But Brandon was nowhere to be found. No footprints, no flashlight, no sound of movement in the fields nearby, just darkness. Within minutes, a sheriff's deputy, Neil, also arrived on the scene after another driver had reported a vehicle obstructing traffic. Kyle told the deputy that the truck belonged to his brother, who had called earlier saying he'd run out of gas and needed help. But what Kyle didn't yet know, what no one knew at that time, was that only a few minutes earlier, Brandon had called 911. In that call, Brandon's voice was shaking. He told the dispatcher, "Yes, I'm in the middle of a field. I ran into some guys." His words were frantic, fragmented, almost impossible to follow. At one point, he said, "There's one car here. The guy's chasing me into the woods. Please hurry." And then the line went silent. The dispatcher, unsure of his location, tried to trace the call. But in 2013, cell tower triangulation in rural Texas was imprecise. They couldn't pinpoint his exact coordinates, only that he was somewhere near Highway 277. As the deputy examined the truck, Kyle tried repeatedly to call his brother. At first, the phone rang. Then it went to voicemail. Finally, it stopped ringing altogether. Kyle assumed Brandon was hiding nearby, maybe avoiding the police because of an outstanding warrant for a past charge. He figured Brandon would show up once the deputy left. So after some time, Kyle and Audrey left a small can of gas in the bed of the truck and returned home, expecting a call any minute. But that call never came. By sunrise, Brandon Lawson had vanished, without a trace, without a clue, and without explanation. The truck remained. The 911 call existed. But Brandon was gone. What happened in that narrow window between the argument, the highway stop, and the chilling 911 call would become one of the most puzzling, unsolved mysteries in modern Texas history. Highway 277, south of Bronte, Texas, a long, open stretch of asphalt cutting through empty fields and brushland. At night, it's a place where silence takes on a life of its own. No streetlights, no signs of civilization, just endless miles of road disappearing into darkness. When Brandon Lawson's truck came to a stop there in the early hours of August 9th, 2013, the world around him was pitch black. There were no nearby houses, no traffic, and no reason for anyone to be on that road, except long-haul drivers and locals cutting across the plains. The nearest town was several miles away. The nearest help, miles more. As investigators would later learn, the location where Brandon's truck was found sits near the Colorado River, surrounded by thick grass, scattered mesquite, and stretches of open ranch land. It's the kind of place where you could step off the road and vanish from sight in seconds. To one side, a fence line. Beyond it, brush and uneven ground that makes walking difficult even in daylight. At night, it's nearly impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. At 12:50 a.m., a passing motorist noticed the abandoned truck partially blocking a lane and called it in to local authorities. A sheriff's deputy was dispatched to investigate. When he arrived, the truck's hazard lights were off. The driver's side door was unlocked. Inside were Brandon's wallet, his cell phone charger, and some loose personal items, but no sign of Brandon. The keys and his phone were missing. Moments later, Kyle Lawson and his girlfriend Audrey arrived with the gas can, expecting to see Brandon waiting near the truck. Instead, they found an empty vehicle, flashing lights from the deputy's patrol car, and the same confusion that would haunt this case for years. Kyle tried to explain to the officer that his brother had called earlier, saying he was being chased and had run out of gas. But at that point, the deputy wasn't aware of any distress call. He saw no footprints, no blood, no broken glass, just a stranded truck and a missing driver. Kyle suggested that maybe Brandon had gone into hiding nearby because of a minor warrant, not wanting to get arrested that night. The deputy agreed to tow the truck if it wasn't moved by morning and left the scene. When the deputy's car drove away, the road fell silent again. Just the wind across the fields and the faint sound of crickets. Kyle and Audrey waited a little longer, shining their headlights into the surrounding fields, calling out Brandon's name. No response, no movement, just blackness. After a while, they left the gas can in the bed of the truck and headed home, expecting Brandon to call once things calmed down. But the call never came. Later, phone records would show that Brandon's phone remained active for a short while after his last 911 call. He had attempted to reach Kyle and Audrey multiple times, though most of the calls didn't connect. At 1:19 a.m., One of the last calls went through briefly, but all that was heard was faint noise, possibly wind, possibly distant movement, and then silence. After that, his phone either died or lost signal. For years, this lonely stretch of highway would become a symbol of mystery and confusion. Search teams, private investigators, and volunteers all returned to the site, walking the fences, combing the brush, flying drones, and even using cadaver dogs. But for nearly a decade, nothing turned up. No clothing, no trace, no sign of where Brandon went after leaving his truck behind. To understand just how isolated that area is, consider this. Between the nearest town of Bronte and the point where his truck was discovered, there are over 15 miles of open land. The terrain is uneven, covered with tall grass and thorny brush. Rattlesnakes are common. So are wild hogs and coyotes. The ground dips into shallow ravines near the riverbed, and visibility at night can drop to zero once you step off the pavement. For someone frightened, possibly injured, or disoriented, it would be incredibly easy to become lost within minutes. And if Brandon was running from someone real or imagined, the odds of surviving in that terrain without light or water were dangerously low. Over time, investigators would analyze every piece of information available from that night. Cell tower pings showed his phone had traveled along Highway 277 and stopped near the area where the truck was found. But after the 911 call, the signal remained stationary, suggesting he didn't go far. It's as if he vanished only a few hundred yards from safety. And that's what makes the mystery so haunting. How does a man disappear within sight of a major highway, within minutes of speaking to both family and emergency dispatch, without a single witness, sound, or clue? As the first light of dawn touched the horizon, Kyle returned to the area once more, expecting to find his brother back at the truck. But the silver pickup sat exactly as they had left it. The gas can still in the bed. The driver's door unlocked. No footprints. No phone. No Brandon. That morning, Ledessa called the police to report him missing. She feared the worst, but hoped he had simply gone off to cool down and would call later that day. By the afternoon, search efforts began, small at first, just family and friends walking the fields. Then, as hours passed and no sign appeared, the sheriff's department launched a formal search operation. Helicopters were brought in. Boats scoured the nearby riverbanks. Nothing. It was as though the earth itself had swallowed him. In the days that followed, online forums began buzzing with theories. Had Brandon been attacked? Was he hiding from the police? Did he run into the wrong people that night? Or was something else happening in his mind that made him believe danger was near? No one could say for sure. But one thing stood out. The 911 call. The one piece of evidence that seemed to capture his fear, his confusion, and maybe even his final moments alive. Coming up next, the chilling recording that has haunted investigators, family, and internet sleuths for more than a decade. A call filled with cryptic words, gasps, and a message no one can fully decipher. At 12:50 a.m. on August 9th, 2013, a call came in a 911 dispatch from a man who sounded terrified. The caller identified himself as Brandon Lawson. His voice was shaky, urgent, almost breathless, as if he were running or hiding. The transcript that follows has been debated, analyzed, and replayed thousands of times since that night. It's confusing, filled with static, overlapping sounds, and incomplete sentences. But within it, many believe lies the key to understanding what truly happened to Brandon Lawson. Brandon continues, words breaking up between static. Then, a strange phrase that's been transcribed in multiple ways. Some hear, "I ran into them." Others insist it sounds more like, "I ran from them." Or even, "I ran into the woods." The dispatcher, clearly struggling to understand, asks, "Do you need an ambulance?" Brandon replies quickly, "No, I need the cops." The call lasts 43 seconds. Then it cuts off. No follow-up. No callback. Just silence. That single recording became the most discussed element of the Brandon Lawson case. Its distortion, poor quality, and Brandon's unclear words left endless room for interpretation. Audio experts, online investigators, and even family members have tried to decode its meaning. But to this day, no one agrees on what exactly he said or what happened in those 43 seconds. Many believe Brandon was in genuine danger, possibly chased by someone he knew or encountered along the highway. The words, "There's one car here," and "they're chasing me," suggest a confrontation. Supporters of this theory think he may have stopped to help or argue with another driver, only for things to turn violent. Texas highways at night are frequented by truckers, travelers, and sometimes drug activity. If Brandon was running on foot in fear, his words may have reflected an immediate physical threat. But if someone was indeed chasing him, they left no footprints, no tire marks, and no trace. Others believe Brandon was hallucinating or disoriented, possibly due to drug use or exhaustion. Family members later confirmed he had taken methamphetamine earlier that day, though how much remains uncertain. Under its influence, paranoia and sensory confusion can become overwhelming. It's possible that Brandon believed he was being chased, even if no one was there. Still, that doesn't explain the calm but fearful clarity in his tone. He wasn't ranting. He was reporting urgently and specifically. Another possibility is that Brandon encountered something on the side of the road, an abandoned car, another stranded motorist, or even a hidden drop-off near the riverbed, and became injured or trapped. The phrase, "we're out here going toward Abilene," on both sides of the road could describe headlights, people, or patrol cars near him. Perhaps he wandered off for help and became lost in the thick brush. In the dark, disoriented, and dehydrated, confusion could easily set in. But even then, why did he sound like he was running? Why did he say someone was chasing him? Let's slow the 911 recording line by line, as investigators later did. "Yes, I'm in the middle of the field." Suggests he was no longer on the road, possibly in the brush beside it. "My truck ran out of gas." Confirms he left the vehicle voluntarily, rather than it being forced off the road. "There's one car here." Indicates someone else was nearby. But who? No other vehicle was ever found. "The guy's chasing me through the woods." The line that chills everyone who hears it. He's not describing fear of police or paranoia. He's describing pursuit. Real or imagined. In that moment, Brandon believed his life was in danger. "We're out here going toward Abilene on both sides of the road." This could mean multiple people or multiple vehicles. Some think it refers to police lights. Others, headlights approaching from both directions. "No, I need the cops." When asked if he wanted an ambulance, Brandon clearly says no. He didn't think he was hurt. He thought he was being hunted. The 911 operator later described the call as one of the most confusing she had ever handled. Because of the static, she couldn't determine the caller's exact location. Cell phone triangulation placed him somewhere along Highway 277, but that stretch covers several miles. She notified local law enforcement, but by the time the deputy arrived, Brandon's phone had already gone silent. Imagine being that dispatcher. A man's voice breaking up through static, saying someone is chasing him in a field. And then nothing. No follow-up call. No answer when you call back. Just an open case file, a name, and 43 seconds of fear. When the recording was first played for the Lawson family, they were devastated. To them, Brandon's voice sounded scared but lucid. He wasn't hallucinating. He was describing something real. His brother Kyle later said, "You can hear in his voice he's scared. You can tell he's hiding or running. Something was happening to him out there." But skeptics note that audio distortion can create false interpretations. Static can make it sound like there are extra voices or background movement. Even professionals disagree about what's truly audible on the tape. Over the years, Brandon Lawson's 911 call has become a legend among true crime researchers. Podcasts, YouTube channels, and Reddit forums have each offered their own enhanced versions of the audio. Some claim to hear multiple voices in the background. Others insist they can make out words like shot, bleeding, or hiding. But each cleaned-up version seems to reveal something different, as if the truth itself shifts with every replay. For the Lawson family, that call is both a clue and a curse. It's the last known trace of Brandon's voice, a desperate plea for help that no one could answer in time. To this day, the original recording remains the most puzzling artifact in the case. A man's final broadcast into the void. A voice swallowed by the static of the Texas night. Whatever happened to Brandon Lawson began and ended on that lonely highway. The truck, the call, the silence afterward. They're all pieces of a puzzle that has refused to come together. But as investigators dug deeper, new details began to surface. Clues that would shape the next phase of the search. And with each new lead, the question grew louder. Was Brandon Lawson a victim of foul play or of his own fear? When Brandon Lawson's 911 call dropped at 12:51 a.m., no one yet realized how crucial those 43 seconds would become. For the dispatcher, it was just another confusing call on a quiet Texas night. But for Brandon's family, and for investigators who would later listen to that call hundreds of times, it marked the beginning of a search that would last years. This is the story of what happened immediately after Brandon Lawson vanished. A night of miscommunication, missed timing, and haunting coincidence. After Brandon's 911 call disconnected, dispatchers attempted to call him back. The phone rang, then went straight to voicemail. At roughly 12:58 a.m., a highway patrol officer, Deputy Neal, was dispatched to check out the abandoned truck reported on Highway 277, about 4 miles south of Bronte, Texas. When he arrived, he found Brandon's white Ford F-150 parked awkwardly on the shoulder, its hazard lights blinking. Inside the truck, the keys were missing. The gas can Brandon had gone to fetch was not there. His wallet and phone were gone too. The truck door was unlocked, but Brandon was nowhere in sight. At the same time, Brandon's brother Kyle Lawson and his girlfriend Audrey were driving along the same stretch of road, looking for him. They'd spoken to Brandon earlier that night, first over the phone, and then through a series of missed calls and fragmented conversations. According to Kyle, Brandon had called him around 12:30 a.m., saying he'd run out of gas and needed help. Kyle agreed to bring him some fuel, but when he arrived, Brandon was already gone. All he found was the truck sitting oddly close to the guardrail. Then, just as the deputy arrived, so did Kyle and Audrey. 3 cars, parked on the edge of the dark highway, red and blue lights flashing against the dry brush. And yet, no one could find Brandon. Let's rewind just slightly to the moments before the disappearance. Between 12:30 and 1 a.m., Brandon made several phone calls. One to Kyle, saying he was 10 minutes up the road and needed gas. Another to Audrey, reportedly asking her to tell Kyle I'm bleeding. And finally, the now famous 911 call. There's one car here, the guy's chasing me. It's unclear in what exact order these calls happened, but investigators later confirmed something chilling. Brandon's phone was pinging in an area only a few hundred yards from where his truck was found, meaning whatever happened to him happened very close by. Kyle later said that when he arrived at the scene, he tried calling out for Brandon, yelling his name into the dark. He thought he heard Brandon's voice once or twice, faintly, from the brush nearby. But the sound was distant, hard to pinpoint, and just as quickly it was gone. Imagine that moment. Your brother's truck is there, but he's vanished into the blackness of the Texas plains. You call out, and you think you hear him, but you can't see a thing. No flashlight, no phone signal, no clue. Only the hum of the wind, the rustle of tall grass, and the uneasy feeling that something is very wrong. The responding officer, Deputy Neal, approached Kyle and Audrey and asked about the truck. They explained that it belonged to Brandon and that he had called earlier needing help. The deputy noted that Brandon might be hiding in the nearby brush, perhaps avoiding police because of an outstanding warrant. That warrant, a felony possession charge, had been hanging over Brandon for months. He was reportedly trying to clear it up, but still had reason to be nervous. To the officer, it seemed possible Brandon had seen the flashing lights and fled to avoid arrest. So instead of launching a full-scale search, the officer believed Brandon had simply run off. Kyle even told him he thought Brandon was nearby, possibly hiding. But when the deputy shined his spotlight into the field, he saw nothing. With no visible signs of distress or evidence of a crime, the officer decided to tow the truck for safety and end the stop. The call was closed out as a vehicle assist, no contact made. And just like that, the last official action taken that night was to clear the scene. The missed opportunity. Between 1:30 and 3 a.m., Kyle and Audrey continued driving up and down Highway 277, calling Brandon repeatedly. Sometimes the phone rang. Sometimes it went straight to voicemail. At one point, Brandon's phone rang 5 times before finally being answered, but no one spoke. Only silence on the other end. That was the last time Brandon's phone was active. By dawn, the truck had been impounded, the deputy had filed his report, and the Lawson family assumed Brandon would call once he'd calmed down. But as the sun rose over Coe County, there was still no sign of him. The vast open fields that line Highway 277 are harsh and unforgiving. Cactus, barbed wire, thick brush, and dry creek beds stretch for miles. If Brandon had walked off into that terrain at night, without water, light, or direction, his chances of survival would have been slim. Still, something about the scene didn't make sense. His phone had pinged nearby. His truck was intact. And if he was running from police, why had he called 911 asking for them just minutes before? The contradiction would haunt investigators for years. Family takes over. By the following morning, Brandon's loved ones launched their own search. They retraced the road, walked through the surrounding brush, and called out his name. The area was quiet, too quiet. There were no footprints, no dropped items, no clothing, no signs of a struggle. Kyle, desperate for answers, called the local sheriff's office again, urging them to search more thoroughly. But with no evidence of foul play and no new leads, the case wasn't treated as urgent. Days turned into weeks. Posters went up. Volunteers combed the area. Drones, helicopters, and cadaver dogs were eventually brought in. Nothing. It was as if Brandon Lawson had simply vanished into the Texas night. Revisiting the 911 call. As the search dragged on, that haunting 911 recording resurfaced again and again. Investigators tried to align its timestamps with the patrol officer's arrival, hoping to pinpoint Brandon's movements. The working theory was this. Brandon ran out of gas, but he began walking along the highway, possibly to find help that he encountered someone, maybe another motorist he made the 911 call. Then he fled into the dark, but that timeline leaves one critical gap, the missing minutes between the call and the officer's arrival. Somewhere in that small window, something happened. Something no one has ever been able to explain. The silence after. After August 9th, Brandon's phone never connected again. No calls, no texts, no social media activity. His bank cards remained unused. Weeks later, his family realized the chilling truth. Brandon wasn't hiding. He was gone. But where? If he'd collapsed from exhaustion or exposure, searchers should have found his body. If he'd been attacked, there would be signs of struggle. If he'd fled intentionally, he would have resurfaced somewhere, somehow. Instead, there was nothing. Every lead ended in emptiness. And every theory led back to the same haunting sound, that 911 call. A web of miscommunication. The early hours of the search would later be criticized by true crime investigators and internet sleuths alike. The initial assumption that Brandon was hiding from police may have delayed a proper response. Had a full-scale search begun immediately, they might have found him within hours. But by morning, the trail had gone cold. In small rural counties like Coe County, Texas, communication between dispatch, local deputies, and families can be patchy at best. Calls get crossed. Reports go unfiled. And in this case, a man's life may have depended on those missing minutes. In the story of Brandon Lawson, timing is everything. A few minutes sooner, a few words clearer, and maybe someone would have found him that night. But instead, a simple roadside call turned into one of Texas's most haunting modern mysteries. What began as a plea for help had become a trail of confusion, silence, and heartbreak. And as the hours turned to days, the Lawson family's search would only grow more desperate. Morning came quietly over Coe County, Texas. But in the Lawson home, there was no calm, only confusion, fear, and the realization that something was terribly wrong. By daylight, Brandon Lawson had been missing for nearly 8 hours. His truck was gone, his phone was silent, and no one had heard from him since that haunting 911 call. At first, his family hoped he'd show up, maybe walking in from a nearby ranch or calling from a stranger's phone once he found help. But as the sun climbed higher, that hope began to fade. Ledessa, Brandon's common-law wife, called his father and brother again. No one had seen or heard anything. His work friends hadn't received a call. No hospitals had admitted anyone under his name. And by noon, it became clear this wasn't just a misunderstanding. Brandon Lawson had vanished. The search takes shape. By midday on August 9th, 2013, the Coke County Sheriff's Office began a formal search of the area near Highway 277, where Brandon's truck had been found. Deputies, local volunteers, and later, Texas Rangers began walking grid patterns through the surrounding fields. They used drones, helicopters, and tracking dogs, all hoping to pick up a scent or find something Brandon might have dropped. A hat, a shoe, a phone. But the terrain was rough. Dry brush, thorny mesquite trees, uneven ground. In places, the grass grew chest-high. Every few yards, searchers had to stop and listen, hoping for a sound, a voice, anything. Hours passed. Nothing. Then came the first clue, or at least what seemed like one. A scent dog reportedly followed a faint trail for where the truck had been parked, leading south toward a nearby creek bed. But the scent faded abruptly. No clothing, no footprints, no body. Just the endless emptiness of West Texas. The terrain of disappearance. To understand how someone could vanish so completely, you have to understand this landscape. Coke County is rugged, sparsely populated land, a mix of open ranches, dirt roads, and scrubby brush stretching for miles. At night, it's pitch black. No streetlights. No visible towns in the distance. Just darkness and silence. If Brandon had wandered off the road, even a few hundred feet, he could easily have become disoriented. Heat exhaustion, dehydration, or panic could have set in quickly. But there's a problem with that theory. Brandon's phone had pinged a tower less than 3 miles from where his truck was found, meaning he hadn't gone far, at least not at first. So why didn't anyone find him that day? The family steps in. Frustrated by the slow pace of the official search, Brandon's brother Kyle Lawson and Ledessa organized their own volunteer effort. They brought in friends, co-workers, and community members. They printed missing person flyers and shared his photo online. Within days, Brandon's story began spreading, especially across Facebook and Reddit, where amateur sleuths started analyzing every detail of his case. They dissected the 911 call, replaying it hundreds of times, trying to make sense of what he said. Some thought he was being chased. Others believed he was hallucinating, possibly due to methamphetamine use. A few argued he'd staged his disappearance to avoid arrest. But no one could explain one critical thing. Why did his phone go dead just minutes after calling for help? The family refused to believe Brandon had run away. They knew him. He wouldn't have left his kids. And that 911 call didn't sound like a man running from responsibility. It sounded like a man running for his life. The 911 call revisited. Investigators and audio experts tried repeatedly to clean up and analyze Brandon's 911 call. It was distorted, full of wind and background noise. But certain phrases stood out. Yes, I'm in the middle of a field. Ran into some guys. We're not talking to them. I need the cops. Each listener seemed to hear something different. Shot the first guy. Got to the chase. Bleeding, chasing me. It became a riddle of sound and panic. If Brandon had truly encountered some guys, who were they? Other drivers? Locals? Strangers? Or was he alone, terrified, and confused in the dark? Theories spread fast. Some believed it was a drug deal gone wrong. Others thought he'd stumbled onto something suspicious, maybe criminal activity in the area. And then there were those who believed he'd fallen victim to foul play, perhaps shot or buried somewhere nearby. But without evidence, everything remained speculation. Dogs, drones, and doubt. Over the following days, search teams returned repeatedly. They brought in cadaver dogs, thermal imaging, and air support. The dogs picked up faint scents, but every trail went cold. Helicopter pilots scanned the creeks and brush, but no heat signatures appeared. Even with help from the Texas Rangers, the search yielded nothing. Then came a harsh reality. Resources were limited. With no new leads and no confirmed signs of foul play, the official search began to scale back. For a while, only family and volunteers continued. They walked miles each day, calling his name, leaving markers, checking abandoned properties, but the land swallowed every clue. For many locals, it was like he'd been erased from the earth. Days turned into weeks. Weeks passed, then months, and still, no trace of Brandon Lawson. Ledessa continued posting updates online, pleading for help. Kyle appeared on local news, urging anyone with information to come forward. But rural disappearances are unforgiving. After just a few days, tracks fade, evidence vanishes, and memories blur. The only consistent lead remained the same. That truck, that phone, and that call. The 911 call recording was eventually made public, giving rise to one of the most intense internet investigations in early true crime YouTube history. Podcasters, Reddit users, and armchair detectives everywhere began replaying and decoding each second. Whole communities sprang up around it, each convinced they'd solved the riddle. But despite the noise, there was still no new information. With no body, no witnesses, and no physical evidence, theories about Brandon Lawson's disappearance multiplied. Some thought he'd overdosed, panicked, and wandered into the wild, dying of exposure. Others claimed he was picked up, possibly by someone he met along the highway. Then there were the darker whispers. Rumors of cartel activity in rural Texas. Talk of illegal hunting grounds, hidden wells, and private landowners who didn't take kindly to trespassers. But again, no evidence supported any single explanation. The truth, as far as anyone could tell, was that Brandon Lawson had simply stepped into the dark and never returned. Family's frustration. By September, the family's frustration reached breaking point. They accused the authorities of not taking the case seriously. They questioned why the truck had been towed before a full search had begun, and they demanded the 911 audio be analyzed professionally, something that took years to finally happen. Still, without proof of foul play, the case stalled. No arrests, no suspects, no solid leads. Kyle, in later interviews, said, "If they'd searched that field that night, really searched, we might have found him. He wasn't far. I know he wasn't." That sentiment, that sense of something missed, would hang over the case for years. A cold silence. By the end of 2013, the Lawson family had exhausted nearly every local resource. Volunteers still met on weekends to search, but hope was fading. The trail had gone cold. Yet, the internet never let the case die. Brandon's 911 call kept resurfacing on YouTube, TikTok, and forums. Each time, it brought new listeners, new theories, and renewed questions about what really happened that night on Highway 277. It was a mystery without a center, a man without a trace, and a call that still echoed years later. When a person vanishes, time becomes the enemy. Memories fade, evidence disappears, and the truth slips further away. But in the story of Brandon Lawson, something always felt unfinished, as though one final piece of the puzzle still lay hidden, waiting to be found. The internet sleuths, keeping the same cinematic, investigative voiceover tone and pacing. When local searches failed to find Brandon Lawson, the story might have ended quietly, another unsolved case lost in the Texas desert. But then, something unexpected happened. The internet found him. In the weeks after Brandon disappeared, his family posted updates on Facebook. At first, they reached only friends and a few community members. But by the end of September 2013, the case had spread to online forums, YouTube channels, and Reddit threads dedicated to unsolved mysteries. Soon, thousands of people across the world were listening to the same eerie recording, Brandon's 911 call. That 43-second clip became the heart of the mystery. And it was the internet that turned it into one of the most analyzed pieces of audio in true crime history. A viral obsession. On Reddit's r/unresolved mysteries forum, users began dissecting every word. One user uploaded a cleaned-up version of the call, enhancing the clarity and slowing it down by 25%. Another posted a full transcript, line by line, debating what Brandon actually said. It started a chain reaction. People began uploading their own interpretations. Some believed they heard gunshots in the background. Others claimed to hear him say, "I'm bleeding." A few insisted he was saying, They're chasing me. The debate went viral. Podcasters picked it up. YouTubers made breakdown videos. And soon, the case of Brandon Lawson became one of the internet's earliest crowdsourced investigations. The 911 call breakdown. The official transcript from Dispatch was vague, riddled with unintelligible sections. So the online community stepped in. They used noise reduction software, pitch filters, and waveform analysis to isolate Brandon's words. One theory claimed he said, "I ran into some guys. We're out here going toward Abilene. I need the cops." Another interpretation was darker. "I ran into them, shot the first guy. I'm bleeding." But none of these versions could be verified. The background noise, wind, static, and the roar of passing cars made it nearly impossible to be certain. Yet despite the uncertainty, one message rang clear. Brandon Lawson was scared, terrified, and whatever he saw that night, he believed his life was in danger. Brief silence, then slow return of soft tension tone. The rise of the online detectives. The true crime community didn't stop at the call. They began building full maps of the area. Google Earth screenshots, property lines, tower pings. Everything was examined in microscopic detail. One Reddit user even plotted out the exact coordinates of Brandon's last cell ping and found that it matched a small stretch of private land, a field near a creek bed. Others discovered local reports of oil field activity, ranch gates, and barbed wire fencing that could have trapped someone wandering at night. The conversation grew so large that news outlets began covering it. What had started as a small missing person story had now become an internet phenomenon. Independent investigators step in. By 2014, private investigators began reaching out to the Lawson family after seeing the case online. They offered to re-examine the call, recheck the maps, and organize new searches. Among them was Jason Watts, a volunteer investigator who would later become one of the most prominent figures pushing to reopen the case. Watts believed the early law enforcement response had been mishandled, that Brandon had likely been within sight of Highway 277 the whole time. He argued that if the area had been thoroughly searched that first night, they might have found him. So, he began working with Brandon's family, gathering online volunteers, organizing GoFundMe drives, and sharing updates through Facebook and YouTube. The power of online communities was now fully engaged. Theories re-examined. As more people joined the search digitally, new theories emerged, some logical, others wild. 1. The drug theory. Brandon, possibly under the influence of methamphetamine, had become paranoid and hallucinated that people were chasing him. This would explain the panic, confusion, and fragmented speech on the call. 2. The encounter theory. He ran into actual people, strangers, or locals who may have been involved in something illegal. Maybe he interrupted them. Maybe they silenced him. 3. The accident theory. Brandon may have fallen or been injured near the creek bed. Disoriented, he wandered further into the brush and succumbed to exposure. 4. The cover-up theory. Some internet sleuths speculated a small-town cover-up that local authorities had more information than they admitted. But again, no solid evidence ever supported that claim. Despite the speculation, one fact united all the online investigators. The system had failed. A man called 911 asked for help and was never found. Somewhere along that process, something or someone went wrong. A case that wouldn't die. Even as years passed, interest in Brandon Lawson's case never fully faded. YouTube channels specializing in unsolved mysteries continued producing new breakdowns, each offering a different angle or theory. Podcasts like The Vanished and Crawl Space featured detailed episodes. Each time, Brandon's story reached a new audience and new hope that someone, somewhere, might finally have the missing piece. Users on forums often compared it to the Maura Murray and Bryce Laspisa cases, other young adults who vanished under confusing circumstances, leaving only phone records and half-finished calls behind. The connection was simple. When technology fails to provide answers, the human mind fills the silence with possibilities. And in Brandon's case, silence was all anyone had. A new generation of searchers. By 2018, technology had advanced. Drones with thermal cameras could scan wider areas faster than any ground search team. Watts and other volunteers organized new searches using modern tools, high-resolution mapping, and improved GPS tracking. But the results were always the same. No signs, no remains, no phone. The terrain had changed over time. Rain, wind, and ranching activity had altered the landscape. If Brandon had been there, nature may have hidden every trace. Still, the digital sleuths refused to give up. For them, Brandon Lawson wasn't just a name. He was a symbol of every case where the system gave up too soon. They kept his name alive when others stopped searching. They kept replaying that haunting voice. They refused to let him be forgotten. Family and the online community. Ladessa and Kyle often posted updates thanking the online community. At times, though, they were overwhelmed by both support and speculation. Rumors spread quickly, some cruel, some false, some deeply invasive. Yet through all the noise, the internet did what it does best. It remembered. Every year on the anniversary of his disappearance, the case resurfaced, trending again, discussed again, dissected again. For nearly a decade, strangers across the world knew the voice of a man they'd never met. A man whose final words still echoed through static. "I need the cops." Echoes of hope. In many ways, the internet became the searchlight that law enforcement had failed to turn on. It connected experts, detectives, and everyday people who refused to let Brandon Lawson's name fade. They couldn't bring him home. Not yet. But they kept his story alive, long enough for the truth to finally surface. Because years later, after all the theories, after all the online noise, something would finally be found. And when it would confirm what many feared all along. The internet gave the Brandon Lawson case a second life, a digital afterimage of a man who vanished in the dark. And while most mysteries grow colder with time, this one burned hotter. Because somewhere in those fields of Coke County, the truth was still waiting to be uncovered. The discovery. For nearly a decade, the case of Brandon Lawson haunted the internet. A voice in the dark, a man who vanished without a trace. But then, after 9 long years of speculation, hope, and heartache, the silence finally broke. It was February 2022 when the news came. A rancher near Bronte, Texas, roughly the same area where Brandon had disappeared, reported finding human remains and personal items, a pair of shorts, shoes, and fragments of cell phone, deep within a rural property line. The location? Less than a mile from where Brandon's truck had been abandoned that night in August 2013. The call that changed everything. The discovery started with a call to the Coke County Sheriff's Office. The rancher had been clearing brush near a dry creek bed when he noticed bones half buried in the dust. At first, he thought they belonged to an animal, deer, maybe. But as he looked closer, the shape of a human jawbone became unmistakable. Deputies quickly secured the scene. Evidence markers dotted the earth. And once again, the Texas plains that had kept their secret for so long were alive with flashing lights and police chatter. For 9 years, people had speculated, had Brandon been murdered? Had he overdosed? Had he run away? Now, the answer was beginning to reveal itself, one fragment at a time. Music fades to a low hum. A familiar place. Search teams soon confirmed the exact coordinates of the discovery, just off Highway 277, in a rugged stretch of private ranch land. The terrain was rough, uneven, and densely covered in mesquite brush, an area that would have been nearly impossible to search on foot at night. What stunned investigators most was how close the remains were to the original search area. For years, countless people had walked nearby. Search teams, volunteers, even drones, but the heavy vegetation and shifting ground had hidden everything in plain sight. Some said it was tragic irony. Others said it was fate. After all the speculation, the truth had been sitting quietly under the Texas sun, waiting to be found. The DNA test. Within weeks, forensic teams collected the remains and sent them to the University of North Texas Center for Human Identification for DNA analysis. The process took months. During that time, Brandon's family waited in silence, holding on to hope, but bracing for confirmation. On March 2022, The results came back. The remains were a positive DNA match to Brandon Lawson. 9 years after his voice echoed through a 911 line, Brandon had finally been found. Not by police radar, not by satellite towers, but by time, patience, and a little luck. The family's response. When the Lawson family received confirmation, their response was heartbreak and relief combined. Brandon's brother, Kyle Lawson, wrote online, "After nearly a decade of searching, we can finally bring my brother home. Thank you to everyone who never gave up." Ladessa, Brandon's longtime partner, shared a simple message. "We can finally lay him to rest. Thank you to everyone who helped keep his story alive." For years, they had endured rumors, false accusations, and relentless media attention. Now, there was closure, not the kind anyone hoped for, but closure nonetheless. Revisiting the theories. The discovery didn't answer every question, but it finally narrowed the possibilities. Theory 1. Foul play. The remains showed no clear evidence of trauma, no bullet wounds, no fractures that suggested an attack. So while murder was once suspected, it now seemed unlikely. Theory 2. Accident and exposure. This became the leading explanation. Investigators believe Brandon may have tried to walk through the rough terrain that night, disoriented and possibly dehydrated, eventually collapsing in the brush. The area's intense heat during the day and wild animal activity could have quickly concealed any trace of his body. Theory 3. Miscommunication and panic. The 911 call may have been misunderstood. Perhaps Brandon wasn't being chased. Perhaps he was scared, lost, or hallucinating due to stress, exhaustion, or substance use. That confusion may have led law enforcement to misinterpret his location that night. The missed opportunities. Even with the discovery, many in the online community couldn't shake one haunting question. Could Brandon have been saved that night? He was less than a mile from his truck. The 911 dispatcher had spoken to him directly. Police had arrived on scene within an hour. Yet, somehow, he vanished, alive, scared, and unseen. Searchers later pointed out that the terrain had been poorly illuminated that night. If only more officers had gone on foot. If only the dispatcher had traced the call faster. If only Brandon's phone hadn't lost service at that exact moment. The what-ifs still hang over the case like a cloud. The internet reacts. When the news broke online, the reaction was instant. True crime forums filled with mixed emotions, grief, relief, and quiet sadness. For years, thousands of people had built theories, drawn maps, and replayed that 911 call over and over. Now, for the first time, there was an ending. But endings in true crime are rarely clean. Some users expressed guilt, feeling they had speculated too much, pushed too far into the family's pain. Others said it proved the power of public persistence, that online communities can keep pressure alive when systems fail. In a way, the discovery was shared by everyone who had ever typed his name, shared a video, or whispered. What really happened to Brandon Lawson? The final search. After confirmation, local volunteers and family members returned to the site one last time to collect what remained, bless the ground, and say goodbye. They brought flowers. A few placed small stones where his remains had been found. Someone left a cross marked with the date, August 9th, 2013, February 2022. Standing there, the reality was inescapable. All the theories, the debates, the mysteries, they had all ended here in a quiet field outside Bronte, Texas. Laid to rest, a small private service was held for Brandon later that year. Family, close friends, and a few members of the volunteer search team attended. There are no cameras, no press releases, just quiet tears, prayers, and memories. Kyle Lawson later said, "We never stopped looking. We never stopped believing he'd be found. Now at least he's home." For Ladessa and the children, the discovery brought a bittersweet peace, an end to the years of uncertainty that had defined their lives. Lessons learned. The Brandon Lawson case has since become a reference point in missing person investigations. It exposed how easily rural disappearances can fall through the cracks, and how vital immediate ground searches are when someone calls for help. Experts now cite the case when training dispatchers, emphasizing clear communication, GPS triangulation, and follow-up coordination. It also showed something else. the power of the public. For nearly a decade, strangers refused to let the case die. They amplified it, analyzed it, and gave it visibility when official channels moved on. In the end, Brandon's story wasn't solved by technology or police databases. It was solved by persistence, chance, and the quiet determination of people who cared enough to keep asking questions. Legacy of a voice. The final piece of this story isn't the discovery, it's what came after. Because even now, years later, Brandon Lawson's 911 call is still studied in podcasts, analyzed in YouTube documentaries, and remembered as one of the eeriest audio moments in true crime. People still debate what he said. They still argue over what really happened in those final moments. But one truth remains undeniable. Brandon Lawson's voice changed how we listen. He reminded the world that even the most ordinary person can vanish between one heartbeat and the next, and that sometimes the loudest cry for help is hidden inside the silence that follows. Brandon Lawson's story began with a phone call and ended with an echo, one that traveled through time, through static, through the hearts of strangers. And even though the mystery is technically solved, the questions he left behind still linger across the Texas plains. Because in every voice that calls for help, in every mystery left unsolved, there's always one haunting truth. Echoes of the plains. Narration. The Texas plains are quiet again. The wind still moves through the mesquite trees. The night still hums with crickets, and the highway where Brandon Lawson vanished still stretches endlessly into the horizon. To most who pass through, it's just another lonely stretch of road. But to those who know his story, that road is sacred ground, a place where a man's voice once reached out from the dark, begging to be heard. It's here, between silence and static, that the story of Brandon Lawson finally rests. Yet, his voice, and the mystery it carried, still echoes across the plains, whispering questions that time can't erase. Brandon's case began as one disappearance among many, one man, one night, one phone call. But over the years, it became something much larger. It became a conversation about the fragility of human life, about how a single decision, a missed turn, a lost signal, a moment of fear can change everything, and about how communities, both local and digital, can come together to shine light into the darkest corners. The vanishing of Brandon Lawson was never just about what happened that night in August 2013. It was about what happened after, the people who refused to stop searching, the strangers who turned curiosity into compassion, and the way the internet became a living memorial for a man few had ever met. The digital footprint. Every click, every theory, every upload analysis created a kind of digital echo, one that kept Brandon's voice alive when official reports fell silent. The 911 call became a mirror of our modern world. A man in trouble, reaching out through technology, hoping someone on the other end would understand. And though that call didn't save him, it did something remarkable. It united thousands of listeners across the globe. For nearly 10 years, his voice traveled through time and screens, replayed millions of times, haunting and human all at once. Each replay was a kind of vigil. Each analysis, a prayer in code and pixels. The power and the price of attention. The online world did what no police department could. It kept the case alive. But it also revealed a darker side of our collective fascination with tragedy. Some people became obsessed, turning theories into arguments, facts into fiction. Families like the Lawsons were often caught in the crossfire of speculation, their grief magnified by endless public scrutiny. True crime, after all, lives on a delicate line between investigation and intrusion. Brandon's story became a reminder that behind every case, behind every headline or YouTube video, are real people still trying to heal. The digital spotlight gave the Lawson family justice, but also showed us how easily empathy can get lost in the noise. The family's healing. Years later, Brandon's children have grown up. They now know their father's name, not through fading memory, but through the voices of millions who refuse to let him disappear completely. Cal still visits the area sometimes, quiet, reflective. He once said, "When I stand there and hear the wind, It's like he's still trying to tell us something. For Ladessa, healing came not through answers, but through peace. Her words remained simple. He's home. That's what matters now. Their grief became something shared, not just by family, but by strangers across countries who followed their pain and their persistence. It became a modern kind of mourning, digital, collective, and deeply human. The broader mystery, even with the discovery, the mystery of Brandon Lawson still lingers. Not in what happened, but in why it happened the way it did. Why wasn't his 911 call traced accurately? Why did search teams miss the area so close to his truck? Why does our system still fail so many missing persons, especially in rural America, where help can be hours away? These are the questions his story leaves behind, questions that extend far beyond the plains of Texas. Brandon's voice, caught in that 43-second call, represents every cry for help that went unanswered, every person who vanished before the world noticed they were gone. A global impact. Since his case resurfaced online, Brandon's story has inspired other families of the missing to keep pushing, keep sharing, keep hoping. Across Reddit, YouTube, and podcasts, his name is often cited alongside other unsolved disappearances, a reminder that time doesn't have to erase truth. In this new digital age, the internet has become both courtroom and cathedral, a place where the voices of the lost can still be heard, and where their stories can outlive the silence. The vanishing of Brandon Lawson reminds us that the search for truth doesn't always end with an answer. Sometimes it ends with understanding. Sometimes it ends with peace. The final echo. In the years since his discovery, the field where Brandon was found has gone quiet again. Grass grows where the evidence markers once stood. The only sound is the wind, moving across the dry Texas earth. The same wind that carried his final words into the night so long ago. If you stand there long enough, some say you can still feel the weight of that silence, the kind that hums beneath the sound of life continuing. And if you listen closely, maybe, just maybe, you can still hear him. I need the cops. Those 4 words, distorted, desperate, human, will forever echo through true crime history. Final words. Brandon Lawson's story began with fear and confusion. It ended with discovery and peace. And in between, it connected thousands of strangers who refused to let him vanish from memory. He may have been one man, lost on a lonely Texas road, but through his story, he gave a voice to countless others who never got the chance to be heard. Because in the end, this story isn't just about what was lost. It's about what we found, compassion, community, and the enduring truth that no voice should ever fade into static. In the stillness of the Texas plains, one question remains: what really happened to Brandon Lawson? Some say it was fear. Some say foul play. Others believe there's something deeper in the silence, something we may never fully understand. But one thing is certain: his voice still haunts the static, whispering across time, reminding us that truth doesn't vanish. It just waits to be found. If this mystery touched you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support keeps stories like this alive, and we upload new mysteries every single day. Thank you for watching the Mystery Vault and Dark Truth, where we search for what's lost and listen to what the silence tries to tell us.